Welcome to our Exercise Science podcast. Today we're focusing on the anatomy and physiology unit, and within that unit we're looking at muscles of the arm that deal specifically with actions at the elbow. We're going to take a look at 8 different muscles, and those are the Biceps Brachii, the Brachialis, the Brachioradialis, the Pronator teres, Triceps Brachii, Anconeus, Supinator, and Pronator Quadratus, and we're going to take a look at what actions those muscles are responsible for in and around the elbow, and those actions are flexion and extension of the arm, and supination and pronation of the forearm. Starting with the Biceps Brachii, we will notice that the Biceps Brachii has 2 heads, a long head and a short head, and you can see their origin points up here on the scapula. And those origin points are, for the long head, the coracoid process of the scapula. And for the short head, the posterior portion of the scapula. Short head goes around behind, past the shoulder joint into the scapula and connects there. And they have their insertion point on the radius, as you see here, and the interosseous membrane of the forearm. And that is a membrane that runs between the radius and the ulna, keeping the bones of the forearm tightly packed together. The brachialis is a second prime mover of the elbow, both the biceps and the biceps. The brachialis is a second prime mover of the elbow. Both the brachialis and the biceps brachii work to allow for the arm to flex. The biceps, being a larger muscle, applies more power. However, the brachialis has a better mechanical advantage. The brachialis has its origin on the distal half of the anterior humerus, as you see here, and it has its insertion on the proximal anterior ulna. The brachioradialis is a long, slender muscle that has its origin point on the lateral aspect of the humerus, and it comes all the way down across the elbow, down the forearm, and inserts on the distal lateral radius. And you see it inserting all the way down here near the wrist. The Pronator teres has its origin on the medial epicondyle of the humerus, this being the medial epicondyle, and there's the insertion point. And it also has an insertion point on the proximal area of the ulna, and it has its origins, as you can see, down on the lateral radial shaft. The Triceps brachii has 3 heads, and those heads have their origins, 1, 2, and the second one is underneath. And those origin points are scapula, and that would be on the lateral margin of the scapula. And the lateral and medial heads, which you'll see down in this area, have their origins on the posterior humerus. One of them is slightly more distal than the other. And the triceps has its collective insertion on the proximal posterior ulna, right here. And the triceps, as you can probably tell from its position, is the prime mover in the action of extension at the elbow. The anconeus is a small muscle located just posterior to the elbow, and it has its insertion. The anconeus is a small muscle which has its location just posterior of the elbow. It has its origin point on the lateral epicondyle of the humerus. Here's the lateral epicondyle, and there you see the origin point. And it has its insertion point on the proximal ulna, running down in this area. The supinator is the next muscle we're going to look at, and it has 2 origins. The lateral epicondyle of the humerus, as you see here, and the proximal radius, and the proximal ulna, so it is also underneath here. So these origin points are where it begins, and it inserts on the proximal radius, as you see. And last but not least, we have the very small Pronator Quadratus. The Pronator Quadratus has its origin on the anterior surface of the distal ulna, and it has its insertion on the anterior surface of the distal radius. The actions that those muscles play, they allow for the forearm to rotate over itself and rotate from the pronated position, which would be palms down, as you see here. If we rotate our palms into this position so they're facing down, we have pronation, and if we rotate the other way so we have palms up, we have supination, and the muscle that is primarily responsible for that is the biceps brachii. Biceps brachii is the prime mover in supination. The pronator quadratus is the prime pronator. Now looking at the other two actions, these are the ones you're obviously going to see. They're easy to visualize. We have the actions of flexion at the elbow, and the prime movers in flexion are the biceps brachii, as you see here, and also the brachialis, which is located under here, a shorter, thick muscle that has a good mechanical advantage, and the muscles that are primarily responsible for extension, which is this action, is the muscle located on the back of the upper arm, and that is the triceps.